All right, Yogi, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today?
The name is Yogi Mueller, and I currently am the Vice President of Leadership and Talent Development for Bluegreen Vacations. I've been with that company for 11 years. I've been in hospitality most of the last 30 years of my life. I took some time off to go into the education world and teach in a graduate school, kind of create a graduate program, help create a graduate program, and I missed hospitality and had to come back. So I am a service guy through and through, as they say.
That's awesome. Like born and bred. And it's great. It's like that level of expertise, obviously, you obviously you've run such a gamut in terms of like literally everything. I mean, you're down in Florida, which is basically like the home of hospitality in the United States. We're coming out of COVID now. Like, I mean, we're out of COVID, but I mean, like, in the sense that like we've kind of come, you've seen so much here. And I feel like the questions I'm going to ask you are very like kind of almost like prescient in the sense that like I feel like your insights are going to be even more like elevated than most that I've spoken to, given like your just like general area of expertise. I suppose like kicking that off. I mean, what do you think like right now are your three biggest roadblocks in hospitality? Roadblocks.
Great question. Three things that we've focused on recently are, one, the hospitality industry, as you can imagine, took a hit in 2020, right? We had Disney shut down, the major hospitality names shut down, restaurants closed. And so hospitality became a very vulnerable industry at that time. And what we saw coming out of COVID is there was this reluctance to come back into hospitality because of the volatility of it. And a lot of people left the industry. A lot of people moved on. They called it in some areas the Great Resignation. People left and migrated to other industries. But from what my experience shows, a lot of them kind of had that experience that I did. If you were a hospitality person, you can leave hospitality, but hospitality doesn't leave you, right? And there was this urge to come back, and we saw a lot of people that left the industry to come back because they really loved that feeling of putting other people's needs ahead of their own, right? So we still need to get some of our old flock, as they say, back in.
Yep.
But I will tell you that from a staffing perspective, we are mid-90s
super high.
Yeah. And very blessed on that aspect, but I know others, a lot of restaurants you see are struggling finding people to come back to the restaurant industry. So it's going to be a struggle for a while. We have to shift paradigms because we were forced into a paradigm shift, and now we have to undo it and bring it back to where it needs to be. So I think that's the big one. And then it's creating an environment where people feel valued, respected, appreciated, and engaged, because the way we led anybody pre-COVID is different than we lead now.
Yeah.
Because your priorities as you sit today are vastly different than they were in 2019. You've reconnected with family, you reconnected with other important things in your life. You've got individuals that don't want to come back to the office place because they like what the comfort of home brings them. And so as leaders, you need to shift your mentality. You need to shift your understanding of what drives your employees, because it's different. And if you're trying to lead with a pre-COVID mentality, I think you're going to find some challenges. The other thing that we're finding from a leader's perspective, especially if you led during the COVID period in the last 3 years, you were in a survival mindset as a leader. It was keeping your doors on, keeping your people as close as possible, keeping them safe, and you were in this base Maslow hierarchy of need, bottom level, right? Yeah. We're not there anymore as a society. We're not there anymore with COVID. And so we have to shift leaders' mentality again out of that survival mode. Sometimes they have that urge to circle the wagons and not think proactively because there's some latent fear or concern. It's about breaking that mentality and having them be forward looking versus circling those wagons.
You know what's interesting there that you're mentioning, and it's like, you know, I haven't had anybody really talk to me about like the evolution of leadership in hospitality in a kind of post-COVID, pre-COVID sort of comparison. And, you know, I'd love to actually just dig into that a bit, in the sense that, like, you know, is the need for an evolved leadership stemming from a changing workforce behavior, or is it that the consumer behavior has changed and it asks a lot more of you?
Well, it's a really good question. I could see why you're in the seat you are. Yes, and right, because everything we talked about is true about the mentality and the needs and the priorities of your associates, your employees have changed, but you are also seeing more demand. You're seeing more. You're seeing a huge lack of patience in some circles with people and the level of service. See, sometimes you have that rubber band that's pulling that eventually will snap, right? Either break this way or come together this way. So we are asking more of our associates than we've done in the past, because they do have to deal with some of these individuals. But I will tell you, we're also seeing the other side of that as well. You don't get the TikTok videos of customers going, you know, I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you very much. You really went above and beyond. You're not going to see that. You're going to see people screaming and throwing things around over the counter because their hamburger was bad, right? But there is also a groundswell of appreciation, because I think one of the things that COVID did do from a positive perspective is it put us all on the same plane at one point. Yeah. And that level sets people's expectations, and it opens up an understanding, but it just doesn't get views and clicks. So I think that aspect is there. We have in the industry raised in a lot of areas the wages that we pay, because again, trying to keep the people that we have, bring people back to the industry. So you saw wages increase significantly over the last 3 years, but I think both areas we have to continue to grow to make positive strides on both those sides.
That's fair. And, you know, it's interesting you leaned into, like, you know, how do you like look after the employee to retain them? I guess like somewhere like Orlando, for example, I mean, hotbed of hospitality. And I mean, the battle for talent down there must be like extreme. I guess, do you have like a formula or a process for like how you think about like improving sort of employee churn or like retention of hourly workers? Because like, I guess in the data that we see in ours, like I see like, you know, there's a turnover in hourly workers in like restaurants for like 2.3 months or something like that. Like, I mean, it can be pretty like fast. Like, I think that data point is probably a bit old now, because we're more in we had the hire at all costs, then we have to have quality, and now we're like all talking about retention. And I would imagine that I actually would have to look up that figure to make sure, but I remember there was a figure we had, which is 2.3 months. And I guess like you're in a hotbed in a way that I spoke to somebody recently who was about 2 hours from between Tampa and Orlando. He was kind of in a resort out there, and he was like, we don't really have a problem for talent, and we don't have a problem with retention because our talent is not getting sucked into those two metros. And so I would imagine that you obviously have not a concern, but it's definitely like a key indicator of like performance. When you talked about like 90%, over 90%, like, do you think about like, how do you think about retention for say like your employees, or like your sort of like ideology when it comes to that?
Great question. You know, I tell you, you know, you're an operator when you're driving through downtown Orlando or in the tourist section here, and you see a brand new hotel going up, right? Somebody that's not in business might go, oh, that looks pretty cool. I can't wait to see what it is. And in my brain, I'm like, how the hell are they going to staff that thing? So your mindset's a little different how you look at it. But you know how I mentioned about the Great Resignation, right? When there was that war on talent just after the end of the COVID lockdowns. And we called it the Great Resignation because people were leaving because the labor was a hot commodity. But what you saw later on was what they were calling the Great Regret. And people were coming back to the businesses they left the companies they left, not because of pay. In fact, a lot of them left for pay, came back for less pay, but they came back for the culture.
Yeah.
And that sense of connectivity, right? In the sense that they were a part of something bigger than themselves, because a lot of people over those 3-year period of time didn't feel connected.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great argument for culture. You know, if somebody left for extra money and they came back because the environment you created meant more to them than a paycheck, that's validation that you're doing something right as a leader,
Yeah.
as a department, right? So I think the more you focus on that engagement piece, the more you focus on creating that sense of respect and value and appreciation, and to again address their new priorities and address the things that are important to them and what they're looking for, I think you're going to see more people come back or stay. But I want to make it very clear too that in our industry, you know, we have a lot of workers in our industry that work paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of the nature of the job. And even though we have increased significantly wages, a minimum wage in the hospitality industry across the board, I think we still have some ways to go. But I don't ever want to diminish somebody moving from one job to another. And you might, in your chair, going, well, that's just 50 cents an hour. That's a big deal for somebody that works in those front level, you know, line
Totally.
work. And I don't want to diminish that. So, and I've always told any of my mentees or any of the people that I've coached for years, you got to do what's right for you, and we support that 100%.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. And I mean, when I think about like the sort of retention of employees, like just anecdotally from yourself, like do you would you say there's a lot of like say manager kind of promotion candidates that would have come from within versus like saying hiring outside? One of the things I definitely hear from people, less so in restaurants, more so in hotels, is that it is very hard to hire for like managers and above into hotels at the moment. That's something I'm hearing. And that like finding that like diamond to like groom into a position where they can bloom into a great manager is like almost like a priority for like hotels and like resorts. That's definitely something I've heard, which is not the same, not necessarily the same in restaurants, where I guess that's just the natural progression for people within restaurants, that like some people like to be a waiter and will always be a waiter, whereas some like to be an operator or like the runner of a restaurant. So like I'm curious, like when you think about retention as well, do you see like a lot of sort of graduation points for a lot of your employees as well?
We do. Our company is, especially in resort operations, have many programs that are in place to build, to grow. We call it the Career Accelerator Series, right? And it's stepping stones to help you get into different positions. And we have a bench. But when you have individuals that are in those higher up positions that may be leaving hospitality, we had a lot of leaders leave and hospitality. You know, it clears the bench quickly. So there is, you know, you need to replenish the bench. But one of the things I found post-COVID which is interesting, is in the hospitality business, the more mobile you are, the more flexible you are in your career growth, the more opportunities you have. But you know what I found interesting, and I don't have any figures to back this up, from Kinsey or something like that, right? But my perception is a lot more people are not willing to relocate because of family. And I wonder if that's a post-COVID kind of feeling, that the priorities have changed, right? Where home is more important and roots are more important than every 2 years bouncing around to someplace else. So in our business, where the more relocatable you are, the better opportunities you have, we're finding a lot of people are like, I'm pretty much okay where I am.
Well, you know what's an interesting point on that, and I do have a data point because I read this yesterday, and I actually have the tab open. Okay, so you know the way, like, here we go. So return to office, you know, like this return to office phase, like we had the work from home, now we have return to office. According to Redfin, over 10% of sellers in the United States are selling because of return to office right now. So obviously what's happened is people have relocated because of work from home. And now this return to office is happening and people can't live in Missoula, Montana anymore and work remotely there, you know. And I think we're seeing that sort of accordion kind of play out where, you know, employees have a lot of leverage now, employers have a lot of leverage, and that's just kind of, I think, the phase in the cycle that we're at. But like 10% is an awful lot of property in the United States to be for sale, literally because of one thing, you know. So it's like, I wonder about the evolution of this trend where people relocating, people commuting to work. You know, I even think about myself, you know, not to make the podcast about me, but like, even like when I have to commute, I had been living in San Francisco for the last 8 years until 3 weeks ago. And I moved to New York, and I would go to our office and co-work about once, twice a month. And before COVID, up until March 2020, I was getting on the bus and it'd be 15 minutes and I would be downtown in San Francisco. I think I could probably count in my, like, both hands the amount of times I went downtown after that, you know, in the sense that my entire habit, my way of working has like completely changed. And obviously I'm like, you know, technology, like software employee where a laptop and I can go. But like, that is kind of like, I would say like a general population vibe as opposed to just necessarily someone in software. So I think it's quite interesting how the roles, not just in say something like software, but also like hospitality, you know, other like retail, like how they can scale these in office, these in company, these in person sort of roles and kind of offer the types of tangible benefits that people are looking for. One of the key things that like we see in our data is that like the competition isn't restaurant to restaurant or hotel to restaurant, and in the sort of like traditional hospitality, that a lot of it is stemming from Amazon, DoorDash, Uber Eats as well, where this type of trend of like flexible work hours, you know, not having a chef bark at you, you know what I mean? Like all these things. Whereas Amazon are like, well, you can go into this Amazon fulfillment center, you can wear your headphones, you can listen to your podcasts, you know, we'll give you much better hourly salary than any other restaurant or hotel can give you. We'll put you on a college roadmap if you want to get educated, that they can offer, these gigantic companies can offer it, that are siphoning a lot of talent. Like one of the data points that we always say is that like over 800,000 people left the hospitality space in the United States since COVID and haven't come back. So there's a glut of like 800,000 people that are just roles that need to be filled. And that obviously has that impact on like, you know, place can't stay open late. You know, if you think about a hotel, how do you do like night shifts? I've interviewed so many hoteliers now, and they say that the number one most difficult thing is the night auditor is the most hardest thing they can hire. And you're probably like facing the same thing. I mean, it's actually like I was on a call yesterday with a hotelier in North Carolina, and you think like between Raleigh and Durham, like, you know, you got the universities there, you got all the tech companies that like there's a lot of people there to like, you know, service, and they cannot find the talent. Which or not that they can't find it, but like it is the most challenging like role for them to find. And I think about that a lot, you know, like in terms of like where is this kind of talent going to come from, and who are going to be winners and losers, I suppose, ultimately in defining a new sort of environment for employees to thrive in that. Like how can a hotel or how can a restaurant compete with Amazon? And it's not necessarily by offering them more money. So it's like, how do you think about emerging trends? And this leads into the question I wanted to ask you, which is like, what do you see are like emerging trends in like the hiring and the training of employees, given that it's such an intense competition that you find yourself in?
So first, I want to comment on something that, and then I'll go to your question. And you know, when you think about post-COVID and all of the accolades that our quote unquote heroes got, right? Yeah. Your first responders, your medical staff, your, you know, and rightfully so, right? They were on the front lines. But what you never hear in that conversation are your hospitality workers, right?
Totally.
That, you know, we had several resorts because we're timeshare that didn't close because they, and so we had people who were afraid to leave their house. They had to wipe down their to-go containers, but had to go to work and had to face people. And all they had was a piece of plexiglass separating them and the person in the grocery stores, right? Those folks are the heroes. Those are the ones that were not solely, but need to be included in that, because they weren't able to go home. They had to deal with people. They had to deal with all the stuff that was going on. So I want to make sure we give them a pat on the back for the work that they did.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I mean, Florida was open. You know what I mean? Like, as in
by July.
Yeah. I actually had a call with somebody from Florida very recently, and they talked to me about Florida fatigue. I'm not sure if you've heard that phrase, where that everyone basically vacationed there because everywhere else was closed.
Yeah.
That there's almost like a fatigue for Florida now. And I'm curious, I wasn't going to bring that up. It's just like the way that we kind of evolved into this. I was like, I heard that phrase and I was like, oh, that is interesting that somebody would say that. And I'm like, oh, that's like, if you know what I mean? Like, as in,
we still broke records and they're still paying my that. So
yeah, it's like, it's very much a speak for yourself.
We're going to start charging it. Then I'll see something. To answer your question, in terms of what is the new things we need to look at, and I will tell you, mindset. When I heard somebody applied for a job at a front desk at one of our resorts, and they came in and basically said, well, I don't want to work weekends and I don't want to work days. And my old brain, Disney had Disney experience and the whole thing. And I'm like, don't they know what industry this is? Don't they know that there's no weekends off and holidays off?
Yeah.
That is a mindset that we need to change. How do we continue to provide the service that we do, but think outside the box creatively in terms of how we position our roles, how we position our work staff, right? How do we position, incentivize? How do we incentivize evening manager positions where we never had to before? And think outside the box in those areas. I think that's where the next step that we need to be as leaders in the hospitality industry.
That's actually interesting. And again, I'm loving this sort of the leadership like thread that's kind of like finding its way through the whole conversation. Because I feel like, I mean, that's your bread and butter. And I mean, you know, it's true what they say, culture eats process for breakfast, you know, and I think it's very much a case of like nailing that within the organization, you know, and kind of making people feel like they're part of that team. You know, it's like, I think, you know, it's interesting when I think, especially about the night manager, the night owner role, because it's a unique job in and of itself, and how like that person, who that person is like almost, in my opinion, like the ultimate team player within hospitality, because it's a role that is like unique in so many facets of itself. And to find that person that's willing to do it and do it in a way that like a guest arrives at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning, who's had a delayed flight for 10 hours and hasn't slept and has a baby crying, and is able to deal with that in such a way that it kind of elevates the experience for that client, that, to your point, they don't report a TikTok of them throwing something, or that's not going to viral, like, because nobody records the 4 o'clock in the morning great experience that they had with a night manager. So like, I do think like the leadership and just that thread of like trying to find that person is very, very like kind of, you know, I find that like just like very fascinating in the space that you work in. You know, it's like finding the right people and how do you like train them and how do you get them in and how do you like engender that type of leadership from somebody that, like, you know, I had somebody on the pod and they were from an entertainment hospitality business. They would run concerts and they were like a venue, and they were saying that, like, you know, is just like the difficulty of getting somebody to go beyond, almost like, it's like, because I ask a question about Gen Z, a very general question about Gen Z, and this will probably stem into it, but like about Gen Z versus like not having been in the workplace when they were coming of age, and then coming in of age after COVID, and basically like the kind of attitudinal and behavioral differences that they would have in their approach to work versus like people who worked beforehand or people who worked during COVID. And it's like, this person in this entertainment business was saying it's like quite difficult to, like, you know, get people to like take that leap into doing something, to put their hand up to say, yeah, I would do the night shift, or I'll work on Sunday morning, you know, I'll work Saturday night until 4 a.m. and then I'll come in at Sunday at 10 to get the place ready for like an opening at like 1 p.m. or something. And I'm curious your take on that as well, in the sense of like, have you seen a difference in terms like attitudinal differences since COVID in terms of doing that kind of like those pesky hours that are slightly different, or those requests that you have of employees that are slightly above and beyond, or like, you know, the give and take?
Yes, and I think that's a good point, and we do see some of that. And I think the solution to that starts at the sourcing of the talent. I think, you know, I've preached it from the mountaintops. It takes a very special person to be successful and thrive in the hospitality world. You know, you have to be able to put others' needs ahead of your own. and you get satisfaction from that. And I think those individuals exist out there. We have a lot of them in our organization, and there's a lot of great hospitality people in the multiple, industries around organizations.
Yeah.
I think we need to figure out how to mine them better. Mining talent, right? And how do we identify those individuals?
Sorry, can I correct you there? Did you say mind that talent, like look after them, or say mining like in the how do we source better quality?
How do we specifically find those individuals that have a hospitality heart? Because those are the ones that are going to raise their hand and say, I want to do this, and I'll work the holidays, and if you don't want it, I'll come in and do it, right? It's a very individual business in terms of what are those levels of engagement points that you have to hit and those priorities that you need to hit. So you need to be very flexible as a leader, as an organization, to find those individuals, to find what they're passionate about, and then find them in the right spot on the bus in your organization to do that. I think they exist. It's a tremendous business. I've always said hospitality is a lifestyle, not a job. And because once you get it in your blood, it's very, very difficult. I still point with two fingers, and I spent 10 years at Disney. Right? It just happens.
That's amazing. And I suppose on that then, like, what's your take on the job market then today?
Everywhere you go, people are hiring, right? And if you're a hospitality person and you want to find a job in hospitality, you can find a job in hospitality. I think your internal promotion rates, as you talked about earlier, are great. So it means you even start at the ground floor. You've got a really good ladder of progress that you can make in that organization. And I think they roll out the red carpet for people that come in and have that high potential and that leadership capacity, and then to see them grow, and you're going to get invested in. So I think it's a great time to get in hospitality. I think our sales numbers and our visits are up higher than they were in 2019. People are not stopped traveling. They're not stopped coming to Florida yet. They're not. Yeah. They want to engage with family. They want to go have fun. So the numbers are not low. So there's opportunities here. So please come back to hospitality.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well, you mentioned just a few minutes ago about mining talent. And, I guess there are jobs available everywhere if you want to get into hospitality. Your kind of comment there about mining, to me, implies, how do I find the quality kind of candidates that I'm looking for? How do you think about the process for hiring those sort of quality candidates versus bodies by any means necessary?
I think you gotta fish where the fish is, and I have the best example. A buddy of mine who was a talent acquisition leader was telling me a story that he was sent to go to this one resort area, very remote. It's very difficult to find talent, and he's like, "So where do we go to find talent?" He says, "Well, you need to go to the watering hole." And so he's like, "Okay." So he's thinking the watering hole is a bar or a pub or someplace.
That was my first thought.
It's legitimately a watering hole. So because they were on an island, they had to go to this well to get their water. And there's a bulletin board behind the well that people post, "Hey, we're looking for hires." So, that's the depth that sometimes you have to go. You have to, get your tennis shoes on and walk and find where the people are, find where they gather. And I've always shared that story is the lengths talent acquisition sometimes needs to go to really find and source that pond of talent.